Interviewing as a research method typically involves you, as researcher, asking questions and hopefully receiving answers from the people you are interviewing. It is very widely used in educational research, and there are many different types. A commonly used typology distinguishes among structured, semi-structured, and unstructured interviews. The different types can link to some extent to the depth of response sought. The extreme example of a highly structured interview is the survey interview discussed in the previous tutorial. This is effectively a questionnaire with fixed questions in pre-decided order, where responses to most of the questions have to be selected from a small list of alternatives. Less structured approaches allow the person interviewed much more flexibility of response. However, the other extreme is the depth interview, where the respondent is largely free to say whatever they like on a broad topic of the interview, with minimal prompting from the researcher. Let's explain each type in more detail. Fully structured interviews have predetermined questions, with fixed wording in a preset order. The use of mainly open response questions is the only difference from an interview-based survey questionnaire. Semi-structured interviews has predetermined questions, but the order can be modified based upon the interviewer's perception of what seems most appropriate. Question wording can be changed, explanations given. Particular questions which seem inappropriate with a particular interviewee can be omitted, or additional ones included. In unstructured interviews, the interviewer has a general area of interest and concern, but lets the conversation develop within this area. It can be completely informal. Let's consider now the circumstances in which a research interview is most appropriate. Well, where a study focuses on the meaning of particular phenomena to the participants. Where individual historical accounts are required of how a particular phenomenon developed, for instance, the introduction of a VLE in an institution and what are the views of the members of staff or the students. Where exploratory work is required before a quantitative study can be carried out, or in contrast, where a quantitative study has been carried out and qualitative data are required to clarify and illustrate the meaning of the findings. Now, what is some advice that we can offer, some general advice we can offer for interviewers? Well, the interview is a kind of conversation, something that we have all had experience with. However, interviewing does demand rather different emphasis in the social interaction that takes place from those in ordinary conversation. So, your job as interviewer is to try to get interviewees to talk freely and openly. Your own behavior has a major influence on their willingness to do that. To this end, you should listen more than you speak. Most interviewers talk too much. The interview is not a platform for the interviewer's personal experiences and opinions. Put questions in a straightforward, clear and non-threatening way. If people are confused or get defensive, you will not get the information you seek. Eliminate cues which lead interviewees to respond in a particular way. Many interviewees will seek to please the interviewer by giving correct responses. Finally, enjoy it, or at least look as you do. Don't give the message that you are either bored or scared or anxious. Vary your voice and your facial expression. Really important, take a full record of the interview. This can be done with form of notes made at the time or from a recording of the interview, preferably from both sources. Now, let's consider the content of the interview. In interviews, which to a greater or lesser extent are pre-structured by the interviewer, the content which can be prepared in advance consists of a set of items, which are usually the questions, suggestions for the so-called probes and prompts, and finally a proposed sequence of questions. Let's talk about the questions. Two main types are used in research interviews. The first type is the closed or fixed alternative questions. The second one is the open questions. Closed questions, as the fixed alternative label suggests, force the interviewee to choose from two or more fixed alternatives. Open questions provide no restrictions on the content or manner of the reply other than on the subject area. Open-ended questions are probably more commonly used in interviews than in other settings, and it is appropriate to discuss them in some more detail here. The advantages of open-ended questions are that they are flexible, allow you to go into more depth or clear up misunderstandings, enable testing of the limits of a respondent's knowledge, encourage cooperation, allow you to make a truer assessment of what the respondent really believes, and also can produce some unexpected or unanticipated answers. However, disadvantages lie in the possibilities for loss of control by the interviewer, and in particular in being much more difficult to analyze than closed ones. A probe is a device to get interviewees to expand on a response when you intuit that they have more to offer to give you. The use of probes is something of an art form and difficult to transmit to the novice interviewer. Sometimes the interviewer may be given instructions to probe on specific questions. There are obvious tactics, such as asking, "Anything more?" or "Could you go over that again?" Sometimes, when an answer has been given in general terms, a useful probe is to seek a personal response. For example, "What is your own personal view on this?" There are also very general tactics such as use of period of silence, repeating back all or part of what the interviewee had just said, or perhaps even giving confirmation like Prompts suggest to the interviewee the range or set of possible answers that the interviewer expects. The list of possibilities may be read out by the interviewer, or a prompt card with them can be shown. For example, a list of the names of technologies that can be used in the institution. All prompts must be used in a consistent manner with different interviewees and by different interviewers if more than one is involved, and form part of the interview record. Now, talking about the sequence of questions. A commonly used sequence is as follows. An introduction. The interviewer introduces himself or herself, explain purpose of the interview, assures of confidentiality, ask permission to tape and or take notes. Following then is the warm-up. Easy, non-threatening questions at the beginning to settle down both of you. Then the main body of the interview. Covering the main purpose of the interview and what the interviewer considers to be a logical progression. In semi-structured interviewing, this order can be varied, capitalized on the response made. For example, ensure missed topics are returned unless this seems inappropriate or unnecessary. Any risk question should be relayed late in the sequence of that. If the interviewee refuses to continue, less information is lost, and so on. Cool off. Usually, a few straightforward questions at the end to diffuse any tension that might have built up. Closure, thank you, and goodbye. Now, there are also some questions which may not be appropriate to ask during an interview, and these are long questions. The interviewee may remember only part of the question and respond to part of it, so avoid long questions. Also, try to avoid double-barreled or multiple-barreled questions. For example, what do you feel about current pop music compared with that of 5 years ago? The solution here is to break it down to a smaller question. Ask them first, what do you feel about current pop music? And then, can you recall any pop music from 5 years ago? And then, how do you feel they compare? So don't give questions that take 3 or 4 answers. Also, avoid questions involving jargon. Generally, you should avoid these questions because are likely to be unfamiliar to the target audience. Keep things simple, avoid disturbing interviewees. It is in your own interest. Lead-it question. For example, why do you like WebCT? It is usually straightforward to modify such question provided you realize that they are leading in a particular direction. Finally, biased questions. Provided you are alert to the possibility of bias, it is not difficult to write unbiased questions. What is more difficult, however, is not perhaps to lead the interviewer by the manner in which the question is asked or the way in which you receive the response. Neutrality is called for in seeking to be welcoming and reinforcing to the interviewee, and you should try to avoid appearing to share or welcome their views. For example, if someone keeps repeating how happy they are with the technology, you should not reinforcing this. You should be neutral for that moment.